Welcome to the Adults with Autism podcast. Today I'm talking via Skype with Toni Boucher. Toni is the author of a new book on autism called Autism Translated. Toni is also a qualified autism professional working with teens and adults on the spectrum. Toni is herself on the autistic spectrum and in her book shares some real-world insights into autism through a collection of case studies. So thank you for doing this. I hope I got your introduction sort of right. Could you just tell me a bit more about the work that you do?
Sure. Well, I started in the field 27 years ago, so I really just fell in love with the people that I was working with, and I focused my career on teens and adults really because I was finding there wasn't anything for the adult population. There are plenty of services and books and supports and information out there for children, but once you got to those teen years and then became an adult, it's like all that dropped off. And so I felt there was a real need there, and so that was what my focus was. And I really focus on helping the people I work with meet their relationship goals and their career goals.
And you've been doing this for a long time, right?
Yes, 27 years.
So you must know a lot about autism. And the thing I really liked about your book was that it really did tell those real stories and, behind those bullet points that you often find, autistic people are like this, autism means that. But that almost comes across to me like misinformation, because when you really understand and you really work with people on the spectrum, like, we both do, you see that there's so much diversity within that, even though technically we all tick the same boxes in terms of diagnosis. So were these case studies in your book, they were based on sort of people that you've met and worked with?
Several years ago, 3 or 4 families that I was working with actually approached me and said, "Toni, you should write a book, and we'll help you. We really feel like what we're doing together is working to improve our family's life, and we would be willing to share our stories and, to give you feedback on the book." And so I said, okay, well, I'm going to write a book. And so that was the birth of this idea. So when I wrote the book, I went back and looked over the scope of my years in working with individuals and went ahead and took some of those case studies from years back. Martha is a woman I speak about. I've changed her name, of course, but at the beginning, and she was my first adult that I worked with who was autistic. And so I did go back and look at some of those cases from my early years in the field, and then much of it is focused on some of the case studies that are more recent. And then also, of course, as you know, some of the case studies have to do with my daughter, who is now 22 and was diagnosed at age 11.
Was it you that became aware of your daughter's autism because of your knowledge of it?
My daughter was 11 when she was actually diagnosed. And quite frankly, up until just before that, I had no idea she was autistic. I knew that she was different. She marched to the beat of her own drum. She was breaking holes in walls and having temper tantrums and doing a lot of things that, your typical kid doesn't do. But I actually learned that she was autistic as I was doing some assessment with my colleagues. We were attempting to get a grasp of what typically developing children look like, and we were all rating our children using the assessment tools. And my daughter kept coming up red flags on every single one of them, and I said, I think I better maybe refer her to get evaluated. And so it took them a long time to actually determine that she was autistic. And in hindsight, some of the research that's coming out now, and my experience working with women and girls, is that's because girls don't look the same as their male counterparts. And so she was probably pretty classic for a female, but those are tools that we have today are normed for males. And so a lot of the stereotypes that we have about autism fit that young male boy and not the girls.
I mean, this is quite interesting, this thing about the difference, and because I've come across this quite a bit, actually. How would you describe the difference between male and female, and like how autism presents itself? I
think one of the biggest differences is that females in general, and this is not, not all females, but as a general rule, have a better ability to assess their environment and fit in. So they're really good at faking it at an early age. And oftentimes the boys are not. So what we find is that also, girls are socialized to fit in a lot more in most cultures than are, their male counterparts. And so what we find is that, yes, oftentimes girls can do things that their male counterparts can't. For example, they have more social interactions, perhaps they make more eye contact, perhaps they're more conversational. The big question then is, what is the consequence of them doing that on their lives? So a girl might be able to go and have a conversation with other girls, but then she may go home and sleep for 6 hours and then not want to get up to go to school the next day because of the effect that it's had. It's very exhausting. So it's like girls are a lot more able or willing or desirous to kind of pull it together and kind of fake it through a social interaction. And so they're missed often because of that. People don't realize the effect that it has on them to actually act as if they are like their peers who are not autistic. So
presumably that leads to a lot of issues with mental health, I would think.
Yeah, it's a great observation that you make, and what I'm finding from the women and the teenage girls that I work with right now is that they feel like they've never been able to be themselves, and that they don't even in many cases know who they are. One of the big things we work on then is finding out who you are and being true to that person. That's why authenticity is something that I talk about quite a bit at the last part of the book that I've written. And they've spent their whole lives being really, really good actresses. They've joined speech teams or acting clubs, or, watched models walk down the runway, or observed their classmates, or sat in the mall and watched people interact. And they've been able to mimic that very well. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's true to who they are. We see a lot of depression, a lot of trauma. That's definitely something that a huge portion of the autistic people that I talk to are dealing with is trauma from that. And I really work with those people who have slipped through the cracks because they look like they're doing okay, which doesn't necessarily mean that they are. And so, and that is my focus.
The analogy I give for this is, it's like driving a car, okay? I could be really, and this is an analogy, I could be really, really amazing at parking in really tight spaces, but I'm absolutely useless at driving down the road. And it kind of shows the deficits right next to the things you're really good at. And I think sometimes I think it might be more useful to be able to drive down the road and be rubbish at parking.
It's a beautiful analogy. And I think it's really, what you're saying is so important, and it's one of the things I think that non-autistic people have such a hard time wrapping their brains around. But it's so important if people are going to get the support and the help that they need, that this is understood. For example, I can read book after book about, virtually any subject and understand it, but I can't do my grocery shopping. And I can't go into a restaurant. I actually, we did a trip to visit family the other day, and usually I pack the food so that I don't have to go into restaurants. I can't read the menus. I can't sit in the noise. I can't be around the people. I don't want to talk to a waiter or a waitress. That interaction is not comfortable to me. You know, going back to what you said, Steve, about the mental health, we have so many people who, they go to their jobs, they have a house, they drive. Yes, autistic people, many of us can do these things, but there's a lot of isolation, a lot of depression, and the anxiety that you mentioned is something that I don't think that most people, if you don't experience that, you can't even relate to it. Just, to give you an example, I've been working on a project with a woman who was just recently diagnosed, and she's in her late 40s. And we decided that since we're going to work on this project together, we probably needed to have a phone conversation. Well, that was a huge issue for us. Most people would just pick up the phone and have a conversation. But for us, both of us having phone anxiety, tremendous anxiety, we had to plan it and we had to schedule it and decide how much time we were going to allocate. And was I going to call her or was she going to call me? And so this took all this energy for both of us, and then we're drained. It's not, I know you're nodding your head.
Because everything you're saying, it's like, I get it. It's like this interview, it's like I have to concentrate so hard. Because I've always had a problem, like language problems. I didn't really speak till I was about 6 or so. And I still have really, I would say quite severe sort of audio processing disorder.
You're dealing with audio processing issues, and it's something that you're really pretty good about. You're focusing the energy right now on being able to do this, and probably if you didn't mention that, people wouldn't notice it. And I don't know how you were today, but I took an easy day because I knew this was coming up. I've learned with age that I can't do what other people do. I need to do what's right for me, and that means if I'm going to do something like this, which I enjoy, but is going to take a mental toll, I'm going to definitely take it easy beforehand and really gear up for it. My way of viewing the world and interacting the world and my sensory issues were really very disabling for me. When I finally, I didn't want to be autistic. So I really came to the realization, kicking and screaming. But it just got to the point where I couldn't deny it anymore. And so when I finally accepted it, it was so liberating because I did not feel like I had to be something I'm not anymore or do something that I can't do. I can't shop in grocery stores. It's just the sensory overwhelm is just too much for me. And on those rare occasions when I have to do it, and sometimes I do have to do that with my clients because that's part of the teaching process for certain skills, it really wears me down and I'm done for the day. So it was really liberating for me to actually get to the point where I came to terms with it. And now that I look back, it's like, how could I ever have not seen it? I mean, if I look at my childhood and the person I am, it's such an inherent part of who I am. It's undeniable now. But I love that you're doing that a lot of people now are actually, really accepting and coming to terms with, the people that we are and being okay with it. So I don't worry anymore. And now I find myself in the house. If I want to, do a little, stimming or whatever, if I want to just, let my body move awkwardly, I do it. And it feels great to, to recognize, what, I can just be this way. And it doesn't matter. If people don't like it, then that's their issue.
Let's bring this back to your book anyway, Toni. Because who do you feel could really benefit from reading your book?
This particular book was really written for anyone who knows and cares about somebody on the spectrum. So this is for neurotypicals or people without autism, maybe parents, professionals who are working in the autism field. That could be speech therapists, it could be teachers, it could be employers, it could be family members, it could be members of a person's church or club or organization that they're involved in. That's really what, who this book is intended for. And it's really intended to give the autistic voice in a way that bridges the gap. Because I think right now a lot of autistic people are, coming out and saying, this is how it's been for me, or this is who I am. And there's a gap between that and then the parents and the professionals who, a lot of those people really do want to understand, but you've got to have some way in the middle to actually, translate that so that people who want to understand can. And so that's what this book really intends to do.
What message would you like people to take away from this book?
Yeah, this book really emphasizes a shift in thinking. So what I really hope, if people get nothing else from the book, is that they question their underlying assumptions about what autism is and really come to it with an open mind. So, and the biggest, I think, underlying assumption that autistic people don't want to have relationships or make connections, that's a myth. And, I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of autistic people, and I can only think of one person who, outwardly and openly said they'd rather go live, in the woods somewhere all alone. And every other
that may have been me. Yeah, and like I said before, I really like the fact that you show the diversity of how people are affected by this.
The book talks a lot about, other myths. So, there's the myth that, people who are autistic don't make eye contact. Some people do, some people don't. There's a myth that you're either high functioning or you're low functioning. And really, it's a lot more complicated than that, because autistic people are humans. And so that means we are very complex, and we might function one way in a certain environment and another way in a different environment. And so it's really the idea that we're human, we're all human, we're all part of the human condition, and there's so much variety and difference, and we change with time. So one of the things I do talk about in the book is the fact that what an autistic child looks like is not going to be what that person looks like when they turn into an adult. And so they're going to look very different. They're going to have different issues as they get older, and that's something we really need to be looking at. So, one of the other things, my colleagues, when I told them some of the exercises that I put in this book, they thought I was crazy, because a lot of the exercises in the book have to do with the non-autistic person actually being in the space and doing things that an autistic person would. So there's an exercise in there, for example, which talks about, pick a word that appeals to you and echo it. Or, spend some time actually doing an activity that, somebody you care about who's autistic does that's very autistic. And so we're so used to the current paradigm is that we've got to get autistic people and have them look normal, whatever that is. And this book really talks about the idea that what's normal for an autistic person is to be autistic, and we can accept that. The medical model is not really a helpful way to view autism. That we really need to be looking at people's strengths and harnessing those, and that's really going to get better results and outcomes for autistic people and for our communities as well. If we really look at harnessing those strengths instead of pathologizing autism. I always say autistic adults survived autistic childhoods. So, this is this is some great wisdom that we need to be paying attention to. So that's one area where I see a lot of work needs to be done. One area where I think we're moving forward is recognition. There's a lot of conversation right now about the fact that women present differently, and looking at how to make sure that we're identifying girls at a younger age so they're not suffering in silence. So I think that there's been some movement forward.
So Toni, where can people buy your book?
Well, it's available now on Amazon. And so if they just type in Amazon, or if they type in at Amazon, they go to Autism Translated in their search. And my website is toniboucher.net, or you can go to autismtranslated.com.
Thank you for talking to me, and I should be putting this up on the website, and then I'll also be putting your links in the website so people can follow through and visit your website and check out your book as well.